Welcome to the WRAL Daily Download. I'm Elizabeth Holmes. If it feels like we've been talking a lot about foodborne illness outbreaks lately, you're not imagining it. The largest cyclospora outbreak ever tracked in the United States has sickened more than 10,000 people. And this summer, we've seen recalls and investigations involving everything from lettuce to jalapenos to sprouts. So should we be changing the way that we shop? WRAL climate reporter Liz McLaughlin went looking for answers and found that where your produce comes from, how it's grown, and even how much it's processed could change your risk. Here's our conversation. So Liz, obviously you've been digging into this. Are we actually seeing more foodborne illnesses and outbreaks right now, or are we just actually hearing more about them?
It's kind of complicated. It's certainly on top of mind for everyone, it seems. I know I personally avoided salads for a month and a half. I was just kind of petrified. But I think that basically some of the outbreaks we're seeing are unusually large, and that is turning heads, making people more aware of it. We're also getting better at detecting foodborne illnesses and connecting cases that might be hundreds of miles apart. So it's a little like, not as localized to one area. It can be anywhere. That's also kind of putting people on alert. I talked with this guy, Chip Simmons. He's a fresh produce safety specialist at NC State. So really in a lot of the levels of this agriculture from farm to plate. And he says testing has gotten a lot more sophisticated. Whole genome sequencing, for example, that lets scientists essentially compare fingerprints of pathogens and really connected cases that we might not have known were there 10 or 15 years ago. And then, of course, with this first outbreak, you maybe would see, a salmonella thing or a blueberry thing, but now we're just hyper aware, especially when the words explosive diarrhea are part of a parasite outbreak. You're just like, I don't want that. So I think people are doing maybe more to avoid it too, instead of saying, kind of taking the relatively small risk out of their normal day-to-day decisions.
Yeah, I think I too was afraid to eat salad. I think everyone was. And this cyclospora outbreak was just incredibly large. What was different about this parasite in particular?
Yeah, so cyclospora, it's a microscopic parasite. So it's not like bacteria, like E. coli or salmonella. We've probably seen a lot. And humans are its only known hosts, and it can contaminate food or water through human feces. Gross. And there's something particularly interesting about it when we're talking about lettuce. So if you see lettuce, you see this often, the bag says triple washed, right? Which you're like, great, clean, good to go. But the parasite doesn't actually go away with that washing process. So normally it's water, it's a sanitizing kind of wash, and then water again. And the parasite can survive all three of those levels. A lot of the bacteria and stuff gets washed away. And in this post-processing, with everything chopped up, it can actually contaminate other lettuce. So that's how we can look at some of those multi-state outbreaks, or maybe just where there was one bad head of lettuce with it on there, it can impact all of these bags of salads and various products.
Mm-hmm. And you found, as you mentioned, that can just spread the contamination just far and wide. I think further beyond what people may expect almost.
And, we've seen this with ground meat, right? Because in these kind of larger ground meat processing plants, it's been similar. We've seen some foodborne, illness outbreaks because it's not just from one particular cow. It's kind of like all this meat is churned up and then packaged into all these little packages. And that can be problematic when we're talking about foodborne illness, and in this case, cyclospora.
Mm-hmm. And so you just kind of researching all this, working on your reporting, that kind of took you to an unexpected place.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Who knew I would be actually missing lettuce a lot after not having a salad for a while. I was like, okay, what can I do to reduce my risk? If I don't have a vegetable, that's not good either.
Yeah.
So I'm like, is it buying whole? Is it buying local? And then I started looking at hydroponics. And right here in downtown Raleigh, so in the middle of downtown, there's a place called Nanu Farms. You hear farms, you think green, it's shipping containers. So these crazy shipping containers in the middle of a parking lot kind of thing where there's some, a tow truck kind of shares a lot with some different cars sitting around. There's a farm right there, which was pretty crazy to see. The lettuce grows vertically. When you open one of these things that has LED lights, it might look like a rave, or like if you have a red light mask, it's just like colors, and it's crazy. And there can be 3,000 plants in these little shipping containers, which could be an interesting solution for some other things down the line, right? We're looking at land becoming more sparse and maybe in urban settings wanting to have more local produce. But the interesting thing is the way they grow it is in controlled temperatures and with water and nutrients that circulate through this system and come through the roots. And they're almost like kind of tongues growing off of the wall vertically. So it's a little different than what you might see kind of pop out of the ground. And intuitively you think like, wow, that has to be safer. It's literally called controlled environment agriculture. You have so many things that are not a factor at other farms. Wildlife, pests, some pathogens and things are native to the soil like listeria. So, but it's not that easy of a question because they can have their own risks, just different ones than row crop farming because they're using this water, if that kind of system isn't regulated well, if the, kind of cleaning and in there, if workers aren't washing their hands or something properly, there's basically no zero risk, but there are a lot of really good points, especially for, places when it's done right, because there's no agricultural runoff. There's no deer walking through the fields, there's no soil in general. So basically there can be risks, but just different risks to food crops and very, 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 very low chance of cyclospora.
And for people who might be in the Raleigh area and they hear this is something that they could get right in their own backyard rather than buying from like a big producer and, getting something from like a Walmart or Target and not necessarily knowing the exact chain of events that takes a piece of lettuce from point A to point B. They're seeing it in real time almost.
Exactly. And I think that's the moral of this story is that the more touch points that are involved, the more chances there are for risk. So even if you're buying local, whether it's from a hydroponic farm or from Walker Farms, one at the state farmers market here, there's just less touch points and knowing where your food comes from. Cyclospora, not endemic to this area. Very small chance that you would get it from buying locally grown produce, which is also available in some grocery stores. I noticed even in Food Lion, they had a little section from North Carolina. But I didn't fully understand, I think, till all of this coverage, how far things were coming from, how long they'd been sitting in some of these plastic bags. And I think it's just convenience, right? I used to grab those chopped salad mixes. But there is, with all of that processing, all those touch points, a greater risk of these types of outbreaks. And so I think the more that people can know where their food comes from, the better, because that can answer a lot of those questions.
Right. And I think, too, we've obviously done a lot of reporting on cyclospora and people's reaction to it. Have you heard from people who are maybe turning more to their farmers market or hydroponic, just as a alternative here? Do you feel like a lot of people are trying to do that now?
I talked to people at the farmer's market. I talked to people at the grocery store. I talked to a restaurant owner, East End Bistro, who said more and more people are asking about this. It's more top of mind. Where did this lettuce come from? Who is your supplier? And in the case of hydroponic, they give it to you as a whole head of lettuce with the root ball still on it. So it's still alive until you cut it in your kitchen, which, cuts a lot. It makes a lot of risk lower. I do want to say it can never be zero, right? But there are so many little things that can make your risk very, very, very low. And certainly more people, I know I snatched the last head of lettuce from the Walker Farms stall at the farmers market, and they said it's just flying off the shelves. That's what a lot of people are asking about. Herbs like cilantro, jalapenos, the kind of things we've seen in the news. More people are trying to source that locally.
We'll take a quick break. When we come back, what regulators are doing to trace contaminated food and the simple things you can do to lower your risk. Back with WRAL climate reporter Liz McLaughlin. You've talked about this just really complicated food supply chain. More people are thinking about it. Once people start getting sick, how do investigators actually figure out where that contamination came from? It seems like that'd be something to be really hard to pinpoint.
Yeah, it can be really difficult, especially with some things that can have you take a few days, right, until you see symptoms. We eat a lot of different foods, in one day. So it can be hard to pinpoint things, and it just can take time also, especially when you have produce from like different farms moving through different processors, distributors, and restaurants and grocery stores, because maybe the same product showed up as a taco in a fast food restaurant or in a prepackaged salad. And so really trying to trace that down, it can take some time, and a lot of people can get sick in the meantime, right? And there's a policy change, too, worth watching here. FDA created a food traceability rule. It requires more detailed record keeping of certain higher risk foods. And the goal is essentially to create a better trail that investigators could follow when that outbreak happens.
But it sounds like but it sounds like that rule has had some delays recently.
Yes. Businesses were originally supposed to comply with this in the beginning of January of this year, so January 2026. And that has now been pushed back 30 months, so to July 2028. And Congress directed FDA not to enforce the rule before then. So that's a lot more time for people to comply, and a lot more time when we really don't have our ducks in a row to, do this quickly. That, of course, doesn't cause contamination, but really the whole purpose of better traceability is speed. And the faster investigators can figure out what's happening, where it's coming from, and where it went, the faster you could potentially get it off shelves and maybe prevent some people from getting sick or dying.
So in the meantime, while we kind of wait for this, what are some things that consumers can do to better protect themselves? What are some things that are kind of within our control to stay safe?
So first, I'd say don't panic like I did, and just stop eating fruits and vegetables altogether. Be more aware of, just more mindful of the food you're consuming and where it's coming from. Even at Walmart, there's local organic produce. My husband's a documentary filmmaker. He was on a melon farm today. Just the watermelons that are at Walmart are from his farm, So some things might be surprising. It's not always, necessarily the most expensive thing because they don't want to ship big, heavy watermelons probably far away either. But yeah, just knowing where your food is coming from, buying things whole instead of processed. I know it's more convenient, but that can cut some of your risk there. And then local, again, especially with cyclospora. Now we have our own things that are native to North Carolina, but at least with cyclospora, that's not endemic here. So buying local for those kind of leafy greens or sus herbs and things like that can definitely cut your risk too. And really, just in the scheme of things, your chances are still relatively low. There are good agricultural rules here, even for things that are shipped from overseas. There's still rules that they're supposed to follow also if it's being imported here. Nothing's foolproof, but the individual risk is still pretty low. So it's just something to keep in mind so you're not totally having anxiety attack just having a smoothie or something. Potentially lowering it. Choosing whole instead of processed, and less touch points, the better. And hydroponics can certainly reduce some environmental exposures, but it doesn't necessarily mean safer, but that does give some people some peace of mind, especially with this particular outbreak.
And then, obviously once we take the produce home, as you mentioned earlier, it's like you see something in it that says, oh, it's triple wash. That doesn't mean that you probably shouldn't wash it. You probably should. What are some things that people can do to, continue to protect themselves once they're home? What are some best practices?
So yeah, interestingly, cross-contamination in the home is one of the biggest causes of foodborne illness. Things like just rinsing off a cutting board that you'd had chicken on or something like that, and then chopping a vegetable or something else. Like really wash that with soap and water. Wash your hands in between touching things or utensils if you touched a handle after touching that. That's one of the biggest causes. So just kind of maybe reinstating some of those hygiene rules at home. And then some people are going the other way. They're like freaked out about the parasite, about this and that, and they're using like harsh soaps or like chemicals, really just rinsing with the water, maybe a diluted vinegar mixture. But yeah, don't go crazy. Don't put bleach on your on your produce and things like that. We don't want to get sick another way, trying to kind of overcompensating. And, if you're really worried about it, foods that you can cook, cooking does cook off some of those things. Obviously lettuce probably not a choice for that, although I do like grilled bok choy sometimes and stuff like that. But yeah, cooking can help. But yeah, washing that produce is definitely a good idea. Just do it with water, with clean hands.
And for people who are maybe at a higher risk of foodborne illness, anything that they need to know?
Yeah, so really we're talking about older people, younger people, pregnant people, immunocompromised people. There is a list, and it changes, somewhat frequently. Something like melon, for instance, can harbor, just because of the way it is, bacteria can harbor in there pretty quickly after being kind of cut and exposed, even for just a short period of time. So just taking extra steps with those, keeping them refrigerated all the time, or avoiding those foods altogether to cut that risk is going to be a good choice. They just might want to be more cautious. And when it makes sense for food, again, cooking it is going to be lower risk than raw.
So just to round all this out, obviously, with this reporting that you've done, have you yourself kind of changed the way that you've gone about like purchasing produce or just food in general?
Totally. I am actually growing things at my house. I lived in a condo before, so it wasn't an option. But I will say the outbreak didn't hurt, right? I was like, that far gardening goal I really started. And man, these things, like, you don't have to do that much. And I got like a bunch of banana peppers and cherry tomatoes and things like that. So that was very exciting. I'm like, we're living off the land, and it's like 3 cherry tomatoes. So I'm not like, by all means, not a farmer, but the farmer's market too, it's open 24/7. I always thought you had to get up at 7 a.m. on a weekend, which is not really my style to go to the farmer's market, but really you can go anytime, and it's close to us here at WRAL. And they have really fun things like purple peppers and, just who knew how beautiful all these things could be, and just talking to people. I've really enjoyed that. So it's definitely changed the way I shop. I definitely was a convenient shopper before. I wanted things chopped, covered in plastic, individually wrapped, like grab and go easy. And now I just shift things a little to like kind of prepare things still in advance. I can still have that kind of grab and go feeling, but it's just something that I'm making in my home. At least I can, if I get sick, maybe it's my fault.
Yeah, it's almost like you have more control over it in a way. So that's really fascinating. Well, thanks for talking with us about this today. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
You can find Liz's reporting on food safety, hydroponic farming, and cyclospora on WRAL.com. That does it for today's WRAL Daily Download. I'm Elizabeth Holmes. And remember, you can always find this podcast wherever you get your podcasts. That includes Spotify and Apple Music.